Hey, hello friends, welcome to my channel. In this Python beginner tutorial series, today let's discuss about for loop in Python. Okay, for loop is a very important concept in Python. Not only in Python, if you are aware about any other programming language, for loop is a very important concept and you use it regularly in your day-to-day programming. So without knowing how a for loop works, I don't think a programmer can survive. So it is really utmost importance for every programmer to understand how a for loop works. Okay, so now let's focus on how for loop works in Python. Looking at the definition, a for loop is used for iterating over a sequence, which is either a list, a tuple, a dictionary, a set, or a string. Alright, so if you have a sequence, for some reason, if you want to loop through each and every item in the sequence, you can definitely use this for loop. Okay, so say you have a list of elements, say you have a list of 100 elements, say you have a tuple of 10 elements, and you have a dictionary of 10 key value pairs. So in those situations, if you want to iterate over each and every item present in a sequence, then you can definitely use this for loop. Right, so if you look at this particular example, this is the generic syntax that we would use. So here I am just looping through a list. Okay, for x in players, so players is my list. Okay, so I have players called Sachin, Virat, Dhoni. So this is my list, and I'm just trying to loop through a list. So here the players is the sequence, which is my iterator, and the x is the value. So for x in players, I'm just printing x. Okay, so this is a generic syntax of a for loop. Okay, but it might vary depending upon the iterator that you are using. All right, so if you are using a string, it will be something like this for x in this string value. Okay, so it varies according to the sequence that you are using. All right, so if I have to look at this particular flowchart, okay, so for each item in a sequence, so here in this example we have three different items, right? So we have value 1, 2 and 3. So if I have to loop through each and every items, so if you look at this particular area for each item in a sequence, okay, it will loop through each and every item in a sequence. In this example, first it will go to Sachin, it will go to Virat, and it will go to Dhoni. So once the last item is reached, it will verify there is a decision making. If the last item is reached, then yes, it will exit the loop. If the last item is not reached, it will go and execute the body, and it will start executing until the last item is reached. Okay, so this is a workflow of a for loop. All right, so now let's look at this example by running this in our PyCharm. Right, so just to save some time, I will copy and paste this. Oops. Right, so I have players Sachin, Dhoni and Virat. For x in players, I'm just printing x. So if you look at this, it started printing the individual values of my players. So it started printing one by one. Okay, so this is how you can use a for loop to iterate over each and every item in a list. All right, and we also saw something regards to string, right? So let's remove this players. So for example, if you want to loop through a string called Sachin, so it will start looping through each and every character in a string. So it has SACHIN. Okay, this is how you can use a for loop to loop through each and every value in a string. All right, so this is how we can loop through a list or a string. Similarly, you can use a tuple, dictionary, set, anything you want. All right, and jumping on to our next topic, let's try to understand how range works in Python. Okay, there is something called a range. All right, let me maximize the screen. Okay, there is something called a range. Okay, so by the name itself, you can understand that it is used to loop up to a certain range, right? So to loop through a set of code specified number of times, we can use the inbuilt range function. The range function returns a sequence of number starting from 0 by default and increments by 1 by default and ends at a specified number. Okay, do not worry if the definition is confusing. I will show you the example so that you will have a clear understanding. So first, there are 3 different ways in which you can use a range function. Okay, one is by specifying a value in the for loop. Like you can use range function, and I have specified here something called 10. Okay, it means it will start from 0 and it will go up to value 9. So it will end at the value less than 1. Okay, so the incremented value by default will be 0, 1, 2. It will be 1. The value increment value will be 1 by default. So it will start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 9. Okay, and there is something called, you can specify the range also, right? So here I have specified a range called 5, 10. So it will start from 5 and it will end up to 9. Okay, so you can specify where you have to start and where you have to end. So this is another way of using range function in for loop. And finally, we have something called a incrementing value. So we have a range specified. The first 2 parameters are our range, 5 and 10 are the range, but the value 2 is our incrementer. So it's our incrementer. So we specify at what difference this value should be specified. So if it starts at 5, it will increment by 2. So 5, next value will be 7, next value will be 9. Okay, so this is another incremental value. First, by default you specify the value only. Here you have a range of value, the starting and the end value. Here you have a starting and end value, but there is a incremental value as well. Okay, this is how you can use a range in for loop. Okay, let's see this example. For x in range 10, print x. So it will, as I said, it will start from 0 and it will end at 9. The value less than 1. So the actual value is 10, right? So it will be less than 1 less than 10. So it will end at 9. Okay, this is how you can use a range, the first type of range. Next is you can use a range like 4, 10. You can specify the starting value and specify the end value. 4, 10 means it will start at 4. You can see it will start at 4 and it will end at 9. Right? So this is another way. And there's a third way is using iterator, right? So using the increment value, right? So here I want to increment the value by 2. So here if you look at the previous example, it started incrementing the value by 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So now since I have given the increment value, it will increment by 2. So it will start from 4. The next 4 plus 2 is 6, 6 plus 2 is 8, 8 plus 2 is 10. So 10 is the final value which will not be included. So 4, 6 and 8 are my value in the range. Okay, so these are the 3 ways in which you can use Python range function. Okay, I have already done a separate video of how to work with ranges, so I will put the video in the comment section so you can start looking at that if you want to understand more about Python range. All right. Fine. So now let's focus on the next topic, working with else in for loop. There is something called else. Okay, we might have seen in our previous video about if, else and else if, right? So else is nothing but if you want to perform an operation other than what you are doing, then you generally use else statement, right? So the else keyword in a for loop specifies a block of code to be executed when a loop is finished. Okay, so when a loop is finished, okay, for example, if our for loop is finished and then if you want to execute some statement, then we can use something called else. Okay, here you can see else. I'm just going into the body of the else and telling it as print completed. So the usage of else in if and for loop is different, so you have to be very clear about it. So it will be really confusing when you use a if with when you use else with if condition. Okay, so in if condition, whenever the if value is false, only then it will go into else condition, or else it will completely ignore the else. Whereas here, irrespective of what happens, once you complete execution of for loop, it will go into the else statement. Okay, so now here we printed the values up to 10, right? So finally, for some reason, I want to execute this piece of code. Say else print completed the loop. Say completed. Okay, now you can see it printed the value from 0 to 9, and it also executed the else condition. Okay, so this is something very interesting. So you can always remember how to use a else with a for loop. So do not confuse it with an if condition. All right. Okay guys, so these are the very basic concept about for loop that I really think that it is really utmost importance for every Python programmers to understand. So I would suggest you to try this and see, and if you have any queries, please let me know. In our next video, we'll discuss in detail about few concepts in for loop. Like we'll look at how a break statement, how continue statement works in for loop, and we'll look at nested loops, and we'll look at a few other conditions, few other topics as well with related to for loop. All right. So okay guys, that's all what I want to cover as part of this video. If you like this video, please subscribe and follow this channel. Thank you.